All right, so welcome everyone. If you don't know me, if this is your first event, welcome. My name is Esme. I am the founder of Consider Capital. We are a fundraising platform. So we are here to help specifically social entrepreneurs, but really any entrepreneurs who are struggling to think about how they might raise funding for their businesses. Perhaps you're a little bit wonky shaped, you're a little bit different from everybody else. Maybe you have a different ownership structure. Maybe you have a different goal than everyone else, or you think it's different from everyone else. Maybe you've got impact at the core of what you do, and you're trying to figure out how you can maintain that and keep that as you grow and get that funding. We're here for all those types of businesses. We support people through funding support, through our through funding knowledge, and through access to capital. Specifically, we run an alternative funding school, which is a 6-week crash course. We've got some people here who are joining, and we take you through everything that you need to know about fundraising, how much to raise, where to raise, who you might raise it from, all in a delightful community like you'll find today, with like-minded people who are all doing similar things. If you're interested in that, I will put some links in the chat in a moment, and I will stay at the end of this event for any questions. But to get to the core of what we are trying to achieve and learn today, I'd like to introduce you to Zoe. She was an entrepreneur herself, so she built a business and then she turned into an investor, specifically at Ananda Ventures. It's an impact VC. That's the focus of this fund. And specifically today, we're going to learn about what exactly impact VC is, how does it work, who it might be for, and we're going to look at how it fits into a wider funding spectrum. And that's what's important today. Perhaps you'll find that actually impact VC is specifically what you want. It's a good fit for your business, and you'll learn all about it. But there's a higher chance that it won't be a good fit for your business. But we want to help you understand that there are options to thinking about the entire spectrum and which ones might be right for you. And it's important to hear from investors, especially aligned investors like Zoe, who's really, really honest about how VC works, how impact VC works, and who it might be for, to understand if it's right for you, and so you don't waste time. That's the objective today. It's going to be a really informal, casual conversation. We're going to have a chat together. Zoe and I, we're going to ask each other questions. It's not going to be like some boring panel here. We're asking questions. We're going to have a time for questions from all of you as well. Lots of you submitted your questions as well in advance, so thank you for that. I've got them all lined up. But if you asked a question as you signed up and you want to ask it directly, please do. Or if you want to put your questions in the chat as we have this conversation, put them in, and we will try and get to as many as we can today. On that note, I'm going to stop talking and ask Zoe first question. So I really want to hear from you. How did you get involved in the investor space, and specifically in sort of impact investing?
Okay, well, it started off a long time ago. When I graduated nearly 25 years ago, I went into product. So this was the late 90s. So I started digitizing content. One of the first areas that digitized was science and technical and medical journals. So that's what I started to digitize. And then I went into other areas of media, working on portals, as we used to call them then, and intranets, all these old words that everybody just laughs at now and goes, what? So basically digitizing and lots of content and creating new products, new product development. And I did that for 10 years. So I got really frustrated of working for big corporates and owned by private equity companies. And there was always somebody moving on. There was lots of redundancies all the time. And then I went traveling for a while, backpacking. And while I was backpacking, I met lots of really cool people. And I was like, these are the kind of people I want to work with. They're free. They know their own mind. They're not tied to a job title. You know, when we'd move from one place to another, nobody cared what they did. It's just who they were. And I was like, you know, I want to be free like that. I don't want to be in a job. So when I came back, I joined a charity, a learning disability charity called the Macton Charity, and they had a language program that helped people with sign language and symbols to communicate. And they had this in book format and VHS. So you could tell from the previous history what the ideas that I had. So this was back 2008. And so I started to play around on the iPhone, how I could digitize something like this. Showed it a few teachers at one of the big education conferences, and they said, the iPhone's a little bit too small. It's the size, working with the kids and the young adults we work with, it's going to end up in the toilet. It's just too expensive and not suitable for them. So it's like, okay, it was kind of good, but not the right device. And then Steve Jobs announced the iPad February 2010. And I was like, that's it, size of his hand. And I thought, right, that's it, because there was lots of touchscreen devices out already in assistive technology, but it cost between £5,000 and £10,000. So for me, the £300 on an iPad, plus the cost of an app, which was my software, just totally overhauled the entire business model of assistive technology. So that's what I went and did with the charity's permission. I had to do lots of control studies, work with speech and language therapists, demonstrate not only that me digitizing their language program was impactful, so having a digital version versus the paper version, but also demonstrating that the iPad wouldn't do any harm. Because at that point in time, I don't know if you remember back then, there was an awful lot of people talking about how radiation and things coming off phones. Can you imagine the amount we use phones now? Yes, so they didn't want children, or particularly vulnerable children and adults, anywhere near devices. So I had to demonstrate that they wouldn't do any harm, and that it could, or the harms would be outweighed by the gains. And that took about 18 months. So there was not really much of a minimal viable product there. I had to build a lot, and I had to demonstrate a lot to convince the charity to give me a license agreement. And I did. I got that. I started to run out of money. I bootstrapped it for the first 18 months, and then started to run out of money. I pitched at an event run by Unlimited, the Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs, and somebody saw me in the audience. He was the investment manager, and said, "We've got a new program. Will you apply?" It's called Big Venture Challenge, and it was like 2 days to apply, and they wanted 3 years of cash flow forecast. And my company had only been on sale, the app, for 6 weeks at that point. I didn't have anything like that, and they said, forget it. We don't have any tech. Applying. We just need something like you. So I applied and went through all the rounds. It was very stressful pitching, and I managed to win. I was one of the 25 winners. We got 3 years of support, and I got a grant. And that started to, once you start to win, and I'm sure if there's entrepreneurs here, one door opens, more doors open. Like you create your own opportunities. There is an element of luck, I guess, but you can start to create your own luck and more opportunities. So within 6 months of that, I pitched again for an accelerator. When the first lot of accelerators came through in 2011, it's called Wyra, which was Telefonica's accelerator. So we had communications in common. That was all CSR effectively for me. And I won that, and I got £50,000. And then 12 months after being in their angel investment, and then 12 months after their impact VC investment. And one of those impact VCs was Ananda. And so thus my story, starts with Ananda. It's 10 years ago, my story started with them. So I was an entrepreneur. And then when I exited my company 5 years ago, they asked me to be a venture partner. And then I spent a couple of years as a venture partner. And that role, what varies actually, what you actually do. I knew I had a really good founder network. I had been on every single impact program and accelerator that you can shake a tree at. It was right at the beginning, that 2010 to 14 time was the first wave of all impact tech coming through. And there weren't many women in technology, especially in impact tech. So I became like a poster child. And I'm sure some of you here are kind of in your own areas, what that feels like. It's good, but it comes with its own pressures. And yeah, I got to meet an awful lot of people, win a lot of competitions, win a lot of customers. And I had a really good founder network. So I started sourcing for them. So I brought in some of the big ones in the second fund and the third fund. And I did that for a couple of years. I did some teaching. When you've done one thing for 10 years as a founder, it's quite nice to do something else, to experiment. When I always say, if any of you have been, you're looking for what the next step is, take some time out and try a few things in between, because entrepreneurship is all encompassing. It's, you don't put your head up and look around for a long time. And I spent a couple of years looking around, seeing what was about. Taught at university, entrepreneurship and customer development in business school. And I sat on a few boards of charities, helping with digital strategy. All the charities need it now, basically digitizing and starting to run digital services. Tons of opportunities in that area right now. And then they raised their third fund, Ananda, and they said, would you do a couple of days a week? And I was like, do I really want to do this? Because I love building stuff. I don't, I'm a builder, not a finance person. And I have a lot of friends who are builders too. I have my crew, I call them, and we've been through quite a few startups together. They've done their own in entirely different areas to me. Not all of them are impact, but we all come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and we fought our way to get where we are. So we've got that much in common. And they were like, Zoe, none of us are in that side. We're all builders. We need one of us on that side. Will you just do it? I was like, okay, all right, okay, I get it. And then, so I started 2 days a week, and I had to learn all about investing from the other side, learning about term sheets, learning all the legal stuff. Of course, I'd done it multiple times in different rounds as an entrepreneur, but I never fully understood why decisions were made like they were, why things took so long, all the risk management side of investment. I had to learn to be more patient. So it was quite a change in myself, in the way that I lived my life, how impatient I am. I needed to calm that side down. So I had a lot of growing up on my end to do, to become more like an investor and a little bit less entrepreneur. I do miss being an entrepreneur. I think you can probably tell by the way I'm telling you about this. It comes with a little bit of sadness that I'm on the other side. But that I did it for 2 days, and then towards the end of the third fund, it was getting really complicated in the UK, and they brought me on pretty much full time. When I came into this fourth fund, they made me a partner because they were pleased, obviously, with the previous things that I'd done. And as a result of that, I had to give up a lot of other things. Just deciding to do one thing, as I'm sure if you're entrepreneurs on this call with me, when it's working out, you have to give up all the rest. I love doing lots of different things, but that's not possible now. And this is what I do, and after it's 6 years I've been doing this now, and I start to feel comfortable in these clothes. That's how long it's taken to unwind the entrepreneur and the builder in me. And it's still there, and the founders of the boards that I sit on know it's there all the time, and I see them. And when we're together and we catch up every week, all the ones we're quite close. That's the kind of style of investing that I do and Ananda do. We keep really close. We don't do that many investments, but we're always there. And with all the partners have been founders themselves, Ananda. So we always, see through the same eyes. But that's how I got to be on this side of that reluctant impact investor who's, had to grow up and see that perhaps this is the best thing that I can be doing right now, and the impact that I can have, drawing upon the last 25 years of experiences building, is perhaps bigger than I could have done if I'd gone to do something myself. So yeah, just me trying to be a bit more grown up. I'm still a child. I want to build things. Yeah, that's how I got here.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I mean, as you can hear, this is why we brought Zoe in. There's so much to unpack, even in what you said. Just, right at the beginning, as an entrepreneur, thinking of like the struggles, that months and months and months of bootstrapping. So those of you that are bootstrapping, that is normal. That is what most people do, and what you need to do to be at a point where you can raise funding. I think at some point we sort of lost the reality check here in terms of when you can fundraise, and you need a lot more in terms of your business and your proposition and your product to raise funding than I think lots of people think right now. So it's really useful to hear how you went on that journey, and then what sort of a winding path you've taken. I always find it really interesting to see how people get from where they were to where they are. And just also thinking about, some of you might be building businesses right now, but perhaps in 5 or 10 years, you change tack, you do something else, you, as Zoe has done, go on the other side. It's all, any journey you go in should be celebrated, whichever path you choose to go in. But I wanted to, you mentioned sort of being on the other side and understanding a bit more about how investment works, the financing and the risk as well that investors take. Can you tell me more about sort of what do we mean by impact VC, specifically from Ananda Ventures' point of view? Because it's very confusing, all of these terms.
Yeah, it is. There's different, it's a broad church, as they say. So the angle that I'm giving is Ananda. And Ananda has evolved in what it is from when it started. And I think that's reflective of the ecosystem maturing in itself. So when Ananda started out 13 years ago, the fund size was 7 million euros, and it was the first social impact fund at least in Europe, I think. Maybe one other German one at the time that's a little bit older, but it was the first one definitely to come into the UK. And at the time, it was invested in that first fund of a lot of services. One of the ones you may have heard of is Autocon, which is an autism consulting company. So high functioning autism IT experts. So and that that was a massive success for the fund in terms of the returns, but it was a 7 million fund, so it's all in context. And then in the second fund, there were still some services in there, some nurseries and chains of nurseries and investments and some care home stuff. And of course, my company in assisted technology, so there's a lot of disability and social care. And then by the third fund, which was 50 million, and that starts to be, on a parallel with mainstream VC in the terms of the size, it started to get a lot more digital and deeper tech. And of course, with its most recent one being 108 million euros, is definitely a lot more digital. We have a couple of nano satellite companies with the computer vision and measuring heat and methane. We've got precision medicine companies in there. And we've also got biodiversity data companies in there that have their own lab. So quite different from Autocon right at the beginning, but it's all relative to the size of the fund and the returns. Almost in a sad way, the things that we invested in that first and second fund, the majority we can't invest in anymore due to the size and the return expectations from the fund size are suitable for different ones. So what Ananda is we invest in mostly B2B software, or we'll co-invest alongside someone who's a hardware investor if there's a software layer on top of that. We invest from initial tickets are 500,000 to 3 million in size. The round sizes tend to be between 1 and 10 million in size, so from C to Series A. And the fund life is 10 years plus 2, so relatively patient capital. We make sure people have a mission statement in the articles so that when we do exit, so far the exits from Fund 1 and Fund 2 have been acquisitions. Some of the things that we're looking at in Fund 3 and Fund 4 will be IPOs because of the requirement of the scale of returns. And when it comes to the return expectations, we're the slice in between philanthropy, 0 to the mainstream. We pitch in the middle. so there's still a decent level of financial return, but it's certainly not philanthropic. The people that we appeal to who invest with us are definitely really like the impact narratives, the stories, but they're doing it to get a decent amount of return too. So it's not the 7% as you would see on the loans or more of the social finance. It's about double that there. So it sits in between those two. So it's not social finance, it's not mainstream, it's that slice in between with the brilliant, impactful stories and the, you know, and amazing entrepreneurs. And we will look for people who are looking to change an entire industry now. That's the scale of what we invest now, but that wasn't where we started. And I want to say that because what's important is that's Ananda. There are lots of different funds of different sizes, and it's important to know what size fund you need to pitch. Doesn't necessarily have to be.
Oh, you're breaking up slightly, Zoe. Oh, maybe I'm breaking.
Industry changer. My level, is that okay? Yeah. And the smaller funds will be quite happy with exits between 50 and 100 million. You know, it's quite a difference. It's a massive difference. So it's a broad church, different things. And it's just good to understand what size and what flavor of returns so you can pitch differently to different ones and understand the different pressures as an entrepreneur. Use no, sorry, I should have stressed that. Europe and the UK. So we look for impact. When Ananda started out at the time with social finance, you had a lot of stuff in the UK, but you also had a lot of stuff in the developing world. And when Ananda set out to be different to that, it was really, we used to have the subheading impact in our backyard. It was about the underserved markets, particularly Germany and the UK. And now I'm actually in Helsinki at the moment at an impact conference, incredible impact companies here. So I cover the Nordics as well now. There's a lot of impact companies here.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's why I love like speaking with you, and also, you know, sort of you do a lot of LinkedIn posts that are really useful in terms of the information that you share, which I think is quite rare for investors, and being really and I think I've said this to you before, but it's really rare to find somebody that's really transparent around what your fund is and what your fund is not. But this is the type of information as founders that you need.
Yeah, well, you don't have time as a founder, and it's just, I don't like the opaqueness. I'd love to be even more transparent, but there's a certain points that you can't as a financial, you know, we're an investment management fund, you can't go the full way. There's some things that you're not allowed to talk about. So, but I try to be as transparent as possible from a founder perspective, just so you don't waste time. I meet so many founders, and I did when I was a founder, who were so frustrated with the fundraising process, and quite often they were pitching to the wrong people, and you know, and it's not understanding that, and people not, and investors not having the time to say, this is probably not the right kind of money for you. There's alternatives to this. So, and I think that's what you do, isn't it? That's what your community is all about, talking about all the different kinds. I know when I was asked on here today, I said to Esme, you do realize that the kind of money that we do is for this kind of, it's like the 0.5% of businesses. It is so niche, and it gets, you've given me far too much airtime in today, even, you know, relative to the impact that the rest of business can provide. We get far too much airtime. But at least for those who are thinking maybe your business now or maybe a future business will require this kind of capital, you know, it's expensive capital. It really is. If being your own boss and running things your way is the most important thing to do, then it's probably not the right kind of money for you, because the control aspect will be quite different, and you are pretty much not in control. There'll be lots of things legally that you're bound by, and you need to report to your board. So it's just getting comfortable with that. And for me, I mean, I've done bootstrap companies, I've done service businesses, I've done, you know, a VC-backed business. They're all different, and I think it's if you're in a position that you can afford to, you know, experiment with them all, I think it's a brilliant experience as an entrepreneur to try them all, and to be able to look back and tell the stories and live those lives, because there's positives and negatives for them all. And for all the moaning I do about VC, God, I had a ball. You know, the things that I was exposed to, and the things, because you learn so fast, because that money requires you to move so rapidly. It's like the biggest learning experience ever. Tremendous pressure, incredible, like ridiculous amount don't have that, and you do it in your own time. So different times of life, different kinds of risk appetite, different kinds of businesses that you want to run. I, you know, encourage you to try different ones at different times of life.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I think there just needs to be more celebration of different stories, people doing different things, going different routes, taking different types of funding, so that people can see that actually venture is for a specific...
So what kind of, Esme, what kind of funding do you think doesn't get enough airtime? Because I'm sure VC gets far too much. What do you think needs to be talked about more? You?
Yes, I mean,
oh, you're back.
Oh,
you're back.
sorry,
You froze.
Yeah, my internet's having a bit of a challenge.
Did you hear my question?
Yes.
Did you hear
What types of funding do you think doesn't get enough airtime? I think was the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that, you know, VC has dominated the startup space, and everyone thinks that, you know, a success of a business is raising X amount from a particular VC, but it should really be about building sustainable, solid businesses who are focusing on revenue, focusing on profits, and being really transparent about how we raise this funding. Like, we use different instruments. There's more and more instruments that are available to us, specifically if we have businesses that are revenue generating. We can look at things like revenue-based funding, which is essentially it's a form of debt, and you're using your revenue as collateral, which was so much cheaper than equity funding, and can be a really fantastic route for you. Oh, my internet's glitching.
Yeah, it's going in and out a little bit.
We've got a question. Someone's raised their hands, please.
Yes, Zoe Peden from Pennercheck. Thank you both for this wonderful session. Thank you, Esme. Zoe, I can relate a lot, I think, and I aspire to be you in a few years. But I'm working with people with learning disabilities as well, and creating a product that can support them in staying more independent. We're based in the UK, and my question to you is talking about other a good fit to VC and other alternative options. So we've tried VC a lot. Those that have been more candid with us, they have expressed that they love the team, the product is compelling, but they can't build a strong enough conviction as a VC with regards to the revenue potential. And the main challenge for us is because our market is in the UK, and we're also building towards Europe, and social care, which is where we're active, doesn't have a lot of money. Procurement is difficult, it takes time. We are getting sales through, but they're not enough to be a good match for VCs. So, I mean, and that I think is a question also to Esme. What would be your sort of focus going forward? Because I think we are realizing VC is definitely not a good investment of our time, as the focus is quite different. So what happens in similar cases? What would be your thoughts how to approach this challenge?
Sure, it's a great question. I mean, my first question is like, what are you raising money for?
Can you type it, Esme?
Oh no.
Oh, you're clear now. You were.
Oh, I even moved to a different place for better internet. My question is, what are you raising money for specifically?
A bridge round, and actually we have our MVP. But given the current environment and the fact that we won recently an Innovate UK grant, a substantial one, we just like to top up a bit so that we can guarantee 24 months of runway. That will allow us enough time to go over 1,000 paying users practically for our solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question without knowing the intricacies of your business, but I would, given the current state of affairs, I would definitely focus on revenue here and thinking about how you can really spend some time. Maybe the time that you've spent pursuing VC can reallocate that time in terms of thinking about your revenue, because once you have good, stable revenue, your opportunities open up. You've got things like revenue-based funding, you've got things like invoice financing, if you've got invoices, invoice factoring, supply chain financing. I know I'm saying a lot of words here and I can't give all the definitions, but I can put a link in the chat that gives you kind of a summary of what some of these options might look like. And I would, if you've already got an Innovate UK grant, then you're in a good position to get more grants. And focusing your time on that will get you to a point where you are perhaps more sustainable, will always put you in a much more powerful position to then access things like revenue-based funding, invoice financing. You've also got things like redeemable equity, which is an option. It's not as common, but it's becoming more common, which is a way that you can actually end up buying your shares back from an investor. It's essentially a loan. You buy back your shares. So I would have a look at grants and have a look at more of these debt options when you've got when you're in a much more solid position. Is there anything you want to add, Zoe?
Can you just send me a message on LinkedIn? There's a family office and a foundation that I know that specializes in disabilities and chronic illness, and they're philanthropic basically. So anything that's got an Innovate UK grant that might be interesting to them to add 100 or 200,000 in grants alongside. So just send me a bit of info on that. I was only speaking to her last week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I'll drop you something on LinkedIn once we connect.
I think that's a great point. It's not only the instruments you're using, but who you're looking to raise from. And as Zoe said, there's a spectrum here of impact investors. You've got philanthropic capital here, which is more charity. Perhaps they'll look at grants, but they'll look at interest-free loans. They'll look at it.
They like to be catalytic. There's a lot of those ones, yeah.
Exactly. Catalytic capital is providing capital that's high risk, but they're not necessarily looking for those high returns that a VC is looking for. And if you are more on the social impact philanthropic side, you can still be a for-profit business. Then you might be able to access some of that money, particularly family offices who aren't always open about exactly who they're investing in or where they're investing in. But if you can get those connections, they can often give you nice big chunks of money. Yes, Mo, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you? Nice to see you. I have a question around the alternative kind of, like you said, redeemable shares, revenue-based finance. What do those types of investors usually look out for? So how much revenue would they be expecting, and what type of growth would they be looking at? And do they look at profitability or not? And yeah, maybe a lot of questions at once.
Oh, I think that might be a question that's too hard to answer. You might need to narrow it down, because just like impact investing, just like impact VCs, is such a broad field. revenue-based funding is so broad. You've got people that are much more, again, on the social side. They could be a revenue-based funder, but they're sort of an impact investor. They could be looking at revenue. They could be looking at profits. You've got the more standard RBF funds that sort of, they have a set fee, which depending on how stable your revenue is, it could be from a sort of 4 to 6%. That's what your loan would cost you. But the interesting thing about revenue-based funding, which I think is really delightful and makes it very different from traditional funding, is yes, you're repaying by your revenue, but it's flexible. So if you have a really bad month and you don't hit your revenue targets, the amount that you pay back is less or none, compared to traditional bank loan, which regardless of how well you're doing or not well you're doing, you're going to pay back that percentage, and it might be high. So in conclusion, it varies a lot. You need to do your own due diligence, just like Zoe was saying, to think about how big that fund is, their size, where they invest, what stage they're at in that investment, to figure out if it might be all right for you. Any other questions we have today? I have a question, but does anyone else? We've got about 5 minutes left. If anyone has a question for Zoe around impact VC, VC at large, or really anything around the funding spectrum, this is your chance. I have a question for you, Zoe. So you mentioned that people need to speak to their, they need to do their own due diligence in terms of figuring out where a fund is at, so that they don't waste their time. Do you have any sort of questions or things people could look out for to assess that from a founder perspective, so that they don't waste their time and they don't waste the time of a funder either?
Well, the size of the fund is a one that you can look at straight away, because that will be relative to the exit. So unless you're going for, I back stuff in biotech and things that probably need 40-50 million through their life. That's the kind of stuff. If that's not the kind of business, then if you think yours is going to be maybe worth between 50 and 100, look for the funds that are below 30 million, because the maths will fit then into the 50 to 100 million exit. Other things, so look at the size of the fund, look at the sectors. There's a lot of databases around now where you can filter them all on an Airtable. Just go back through that, but double check some of these Airtable ones are out of date. Get someone, I don't know, off Fiverr, or maybe there's in a bit we can run ChatGPT, and we could just get them to auto correct and double check these spreadsheets to make sure they're up to date on the latest investment thesis. But yeah, filter it all down. Use all the filters in an Airtable, that loads of them are available, to find the ones that are in your sectors, in your geography, in the type. Do they, if yours is a hardware or a service industry, do they do that? Most of them will say, if they don't, like we say, we're mostly software. So as yours is hardware but is moving into software, then yes, it's still fine. But most people will say, because it's no good for us too, if you're sending, we want to make sure we've got a good match. So yeah, get the spreadsheets and start filtering. But look, no one talks about the size of the fund. That one's really important to know. Just managing the expectations.
Yeah, I think that's all really valuable advice. And really, it's like trying to find that time and devoting that time to doing your own due diligence, because ultimately putting that time in up front will save you time later on, because you won't have all of these meetings and interviews that will be a waste of your time and potentially be demoralizing, because up front they'll just go, you're not right for us, or come back with more revenue. We had a question in the chat from Amy, more specifically about Ananda Ventures. Realize you consider different stages for a very early stage business. When would be the ideal point stage to approach you, and what are the minimum requirements you are looking for?
It really depends on the industry from one sector to another, because there's different milestones that are required. Like if you're working in tech bio, it might be some time before you see any revenue, so there'll be like clinical trial stuff that we'd look at first, and And then the space tech ones, it's ages before they see any revenue. There will be something around some milestones around the product. And then for some more infrastructure software plays, say in healthcare, we'd look for maybe 2 or 3 years of revenues, because you're looking for the repeat. So the more traditional stuff, we're looking for the repeat. So we're looking at how sticky is your product if you're selling to a hospital, some kind of chain of something or other. So it's just the repeat revenue. So yeah, it does vary from one sector to the other. And I wish there was a simpler answer. It's just not. It changes.
I know it's deeply frustrating, because I always get asked those questions as well. And it is, but I think the answer is helpful in showing that it's really difficult to get that answer, and you have to really be looking at your own sector and those investors in that sector to think about what they're looking for and what stage. I think also just being realistic about how much you need to have revenue-wise, product-wise, to access this type of funding. You need to be much further along than I think a lot of people think. Yeah, and then just thinking about other options before you even look at something like institutional funding, which is big funding compared to sort of angels, which are individuals. I realize that there's more questions, and unfortunately we don't have time. I know, Lanx, you've got a question. Is it a quick question?
Yeah, quick one, if that's okay. Zoe, mindful of time. What's the smallest ticket size that you're investing in? And also the other question is, what type of exit are you looking at? So 5 years, 10 years, I'm interested in the time. If you can answer those two. And the third one is, if I reach out to you on LinkedIn, what's the likelihood of you getting back to me? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so the minimum size is 500,000 euros. And that would normally be in a round of 750 to $1 million, but it's got to be one. We don't normally go that early. It would have to be something that we're really researching and actively going into that space. That's more likely for us to invest, because a lot of our stuff we research before we invest. We'll look at a sector, then find everyone in that sector, and then work out what the best team and the best product is to invest in. And the timeline, it's 10 plus 2, so 10 years with an option for us to have an additional 2 years to get to an exit. So we're 18 months into our 4th fund. So we've got, at least 7.5 years, 8 years left to go on this one, with an option for another 2, so a good 10. So it's quite patient capital. The chances on LinkedIn, if we haven't had a full conversation, it's quite difficult for me to accept, because I like to keep the network to people that I know, because people do go, can you give me an intro to? And if I don't know them, it makes it really hard. So you'll see that I don't have that many connections on my LinkedIn, because I've always kept it like that. Sometimes people just go, whatever, everyone, just get to everyone. I've never done my LinkedIn game like that. So mine's clean. My connections are clean. I know them. And that's how I keep it that way. So I have spoken to you as a founder, we've had half an hour together, then that's when I do. But not everybody's like that, but that's how I do it.
What's the best way to get in touch with you offline? Email? Or now that we had this conversation, will you accept my LinkedIn? Find out more?
You can, well, if you want to raise investment or submit or talk to one of the team, because we all work in different areas. So I'm nature tech, healthcare, and tech bio. Those are the areas. The rest of the team is split into other ones. You just go through the ananda.vc contacts, and you'll see there's a form that you can fill in and say, this is what I do. This is the traction that we've got. I'd love to speak to you. And then you'll get allocated to the right person in the team.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I know that we're a couple of minutes over, so thank you for staying. I hope today you've seen that investors are real people, they're humans, they act like humans, and it's all about building your relationships with them and understanding that funding is a bit more complex than a lot of people think. It's not about just getting, an introduction to an impact investor, which I get asked every single day. It's really understanding who they are, what they want, and individually how each fund works. to make sure that it's the right fit for you and for them. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you everyone who said nice things in the chat. I was following along. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And yeah, see you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.